Namaste. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 24th Professor Maheswar Neog Commemoration Lecture, brought to you by the Professor Maheswar Neog Memorial Trust, Guwahati, in association with Kri Foundation.
It is a privilege for me to offer this collaboration in the spirit of Seva, for which my Sikh community is well known. I offer this Seva to celebrate the memory of Professor Neog. He has been a colossal giant, a titan who generously opened the portals to Assam's cultural and religious life through his prolific writing. I was one of those who was drawn to this unique cultural sphere through his works. Later, I benefited by an unreserved access to his archives shared generously by his family, all of whom are present here, and I offer them my salutations. Even after my doctoral work was over, I keep meeting Professor Maheswar Neog in the cultural archives of the nation, especially in the first decade of dance and music and theatre in India. It was very evident that he was the one who we see at the Inter-University Youth Festivals, at the Republic Day Parade leading the Assam contingent, at the initial clutch of seminars organized by the young nation to discover its artistic wealth. He was one of those who shone the light on the wealth of the region of Assam. It is evident that he was at that time and continued to be for many decades till the last days of his life, the bridge between Assam and Delhi. I have been blessed in person by Mrs. Neog, but it is through this seva that I continue to seek Professor Maheswar Neog's blessings. Thank you, Professor Maheswar Neog Memorial Trust, for this opportunity to be associated with this event. It is now my pleasant duty to introduce our keynote speaker for today, the commemorative speaker, Professor Dhruba Jyoti Borah, eminent doctor and eminent literature. He wears many hats, as is quite evident. Not just a renowned medical doctor by profession, but he has also served the discipline and his region, just as Professor Maheswar Neog had served, by distinguishing himself as a worthy medical administrator as well. He is one of the modern Assamese writers and novelists who writes in both English and Assamese, capturing both the idea, the arguments, and the voice of his people. His literary career, spread over 3 decades, has seen him publish many critically acclaimed works of fiction and non-fiction, numbering over 2 dozen, including novels, travelogues, collections of essays, and historical writings. His books on the history of the Second World War and the French Revolution, as well as a 2-volume set on the Russian Revolution, were first such books in Assamese language. One of his major historical writings is on the Muammariyah Rebellion, and I can personally vouch for its readability and thoroughness of scholarship. His study of the development of the Assamese language is another significant writing and continues to inform his work over the years that has followed. His writing, especially of Assamese fiction, has been translated into many languages and gathered several awards in the process. He is known for carrying forward the voice of the subalterns that rings true in accent and dialect, and he conveys very effectively the pain of a neglected and marginalized people. Katha Ratnakar, for which he received the Sahitya Academy Award, frames evocatively the lives of the scheduled castes and tribes in Assam, especially the Kaivarta community. His trilogy of Kalanta Darar Gadya, Prose of Tempest, Tejor Endar, and Artha, Meaning, is another of his seminal writings. The first in this trilogy won him the Ambikagiri Roy Chaudhary Award of the Ahom Sahitya Sabha, the Assam Sahitya Sabha. He served the Sabha subsequently as its president as it entered its centennial year. Dr. Borah has been awarded the Lifetime Award for his contribution to literature by the Times of India, and he is currently a member on the Sahitya Academy Council. He is also the founder of the Northeast Foundation, under the aegis of which he has conducted many development and social activism works as well. He edits its journal, Yatra. Today, he speaks on the journey of Bhakti, the religious history of the Bhakti movement in Assam. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in inviting Professor Dr. Dhruba Jyoti Borah to deliver this year's Professor Maheswar Neog Memorial Lecture.
Namaskar. First, let me pay my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Maheswar Neog Memorial Trust as well as to Kri Foundation for inviting me to deliver Dr. Maheswar Neog Memorial Lecture of 2021. Today, we are really fortunate to have Professor Nagen Saikia with us. We have Pranav Sharup Naog, we have Pradip Jyoti Mahanta, and we have my dear friend Arshia Sethi with us of the Kri Foundation, who have organized and hosted practically this lecture this time. Today, my illustrious predecessors have spoken so nice and so beautifully about Professor Maheswar Neog that I don't need to add anything at all to what has already been said. I will just want to say two things. That during my tenure as the president of Sahitya Sabha, I had been able to confer on him the title of Prasya Vidyarnava from the Sabha's side, and also to install a full life-size bust of Professor Neog in the headquarters of Assam Sahitya Sabha, that is Chandrakanta Sandikoi Bhavan in Jorhat. Today, in his honor, I have chosen a subject which is very close, which was very close to Professor Neog's entire scholarship, that of the Bhakti movement. My talk will be the journey of Bhakti, the religious history of Bhakti movement in Assam. The Bhakti movement was the most important religious, philosophical, and social happening in Assam that had not only brought a radical Hindu religious reformation, but also had created the basis and practices of an elevated, refined life, laid the foundation of the Assamese language, literature, art, and culture, and ultimately forged an identity from where the Assamese emerged as a people. All this happened due to the ideology of Bhakti, which was walking behind it. There had been a lot of discussions on Bhakti in Assam, both in vernacular as well as in English. Most of these discussions are about the religious aspects of Bhakti and religious percepts and practice. Very little has been discussed of its ideological basis, ontological, and socio-political aspects. In this discussion, a preliminary attempt has been made to examine the Bhakti movement of Assam from the aspect of religious history. The Vaishnava Brahmins movement started in Assam by Srimanta Shankardeva, his principal disciple Srimanta Madhavdeva, and their successor Vaishnava sons and Bhakti poets belong to the pan-Indian Bhakti movement that washed over from south to north to west to east. Shankardeva had been able to tap into the traditions of spiritual, religious, philosophical, social, cultural, linguistic, and literary traditions freely flowing during the Indian Bhakti movement, adapted to the local conditions prevailing in Assam, and gave rise to a very, very unique movement. The movement they started acquired such depth and spread in time that overcoming great racial, ethnic, cultural, gender, and political divides, it's flowered into a movement of such exquisite beauty and power that it gave rise to an unique identity and civilization. The central to all this transformative movement was the ideology of Bhakti. It informed the theory, practice, and ideological basis of the whole movement. This concept of Bhakti has all along been present in the Hindu religious tradition from the very ancient days. It was present very strongly in what we call the Vedanta, the post-Veda philosophical discourses, and in the Upanishads, starting from the Shatasvara, I always mispronounce it, Upanishad, that followed. And it is one of the principal precepts of the Puranas that came after that. As the whole Hindu religious thought, Bhakti has come to assume a very central and principal place. The religious scriptures had many a times held and declared different paths or margs in Hinduism, such as yajna, puja, visiting religious places or tirthas, study of the scriptures, etc., etc. They had even opined that Bhakti to be the superior to all the yogas practiced in Hinduism, like Jnana Yoga, Dharma Yoga, Sannyasa Yoga, etc. Many a time, Bhakti, now being called Bhakti Yoga itself, was projected as a coordinating force between all the other Hindu religious precepts. It has been used extensively to bridge the deep socio-religious divides of Varnashrama Dharma, especially in the caste-driven society. To overcome these historical yet artificially created divides of caste, to surmount its barriers, Bhakti has been most efficiently used. In the concept of Bhakti, people from highest caste of Brahmins to the lowest Shudras, even those who are outside the pale of the caste system, outcasts to the lowest of the low, the untouchables, everyone could be embraced. Everyone could take part in it. And everyone, including the untouchables, were not only allowed to practice it, but were considered to be eligible to attain moksha and ultimately could ascend to Vaikuntha or heaven and get immersed in the eternal being of the God. The observance of Bhakti allowed all these and more. These are very powerful socio-religious concepts. After the Upanishads, the most revered and followed Hindu religious scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, also takes the same position regarding Bhakti. In our discussion, we will try to touch upon this aspect. But before going to that, let us examine religion itself and the concept of God. So I have subtitled it that the evolution of humankind's concept of God and religion. This is also important to understand the emergence of Bhakti. Before starting to discuss Bhakti specifically, let us first try to have a glimpse into development and evolution of humankind's concept of God and religion. It, I hope, will give a better insight into Bhakti. When man first created and invented God, it was done out of fear. During the period of development of man, when the cognitive revolution occurred in the human brain, possibly as a result of very strong genetic mutation, as the scientists now think, about 25,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens were able to deduce the cause and effect relationship of the world and could create an imagined world or develop the power to imagine things and thus create an imaginary universe. Then out of the first things that man had created was this imagination of God. The tremendous elemental powers of nature, the bright, warming, burning sun, the mysterious moon of the night sky that grows and regresses, the dangerous hurricane winds, rains that drench and flood, fire that devours all, the lightning bolt that kills. All these were imagined as celestial powers. And above all these, controlling them, a supreme power, an owner, a God was imagined. This is how in all places of the habited earth, all human races, all people created their primitive gods. And from the relationship man developed or imagined with this God, later on religion was born. Scholars like Wendy Doniger, a famous writer on religious history, likes us to believe that this interrelationship of God and man are like alliances. And these alliances have been three and have changed in character in different ages. We mention them to find out the place of Bhakti in the whole historical process. The first alliance between God and man occurred in the most primitive age, right after the concept of God and religion emerged. At that time, man imagined God to be a beneficent doing who does well, a benevolent power who does well to all, and most importantly, at the same time, it saves people from harm caused by the malevolent spirits. Save people from these forces. God, created by man's imagination, was considered as a benefactor and protector. And in different places, he was prayed and worshipped by people in different ways and forms. To satisfy this God, man made various offerings, including sacrifices. To appropriate the malevolent spirits, that too, created by man by his imagination, man parallelly created rituals and gave various offerings. It was possibly from such duality of thought that the concept of God and Satan was born. In the next phase, what Doniger calls the second coalition, the relationship between man and God changed substantially. In this concept, God is all-powerful, omnipresent, omnipotent, and He is the only one. He has been imagined as an angry old man who not only saves people, but also punishes people at the same time for their sins and transgressions. Not only that, for every person, there is a day of final judgment when everyone dead will rise up and shall be judged by God or his messenger or son, and depending on their sins or merits, shall place them on heaven or condemn them to hell. To face this final judgment, everyone shall rise fresh from their graves. The religions born on the sands of Arabia, now known as the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, had such imaginations of relationship between God and man. In this phase, organized priesthood came into play, and their meditation became essential between man and God. An individual on his own cannot find God. He has to take the meditation of the priest. Absolute faith on this God and extreme loyalty to him became the hallmark of the religious relations and practice. Strict monotheism became the order of the day. In Hindu religion too, the Brahmin priests became dominant, and all religious rituals needed them compulsorily. The scriptures from later Vedas to the Brahmanas were prepared accordingly. In the Hindu religion, we do find the concept of both these two alliances from time to time. At the same time, it was changeable and got adherents from different sections at different times. At one time, the concept of an all-powerful, all-pervasive Abrahamical God also did gain traction among sections of Hindus too. Many prayers in the Vedas are prayers seeking blessings and compassion of the gods and offering blood sacrifices. But changes came. The third alliance and Bhakti. At one time, the whole concept of interrelationship between man and God underwent a sea change. What was the change? The all-powerful, all-pervasive concept of God did not change, but morphed as a Brahma or Param Brahma. Though the God may have different manifestations, which was called Saguna, there are another form imagined where the all-powerful, all-pervasive God has an unimaginable presence, no shape, and was beyond the reach of the human senses, the Nirguna God. But whatever state the God might be, he now became very close to man, to the believers. As the people started to pray and worship God, gods too started responding. The relationship between God, man became very friendly, and the relationship became mutual too. God became friends of man. Sri Shankardeva in Assamese Vaishnavism started calling God Madhava Mita, friend Madhav. And in this belief system, an individual could directly approach, pray to him, receive his blessings without the meditation or intervention of the priests. It was the most significant departure in Hindu religious thoughts, which revolutionized our society. The concept also laid the foundation of Bhakti, which essentially is the relationship of the Bhagavan, God, and the Bhaktas, the worshippers. God was now on the side of man, even on the side of the unbelievers. He was not adverse to take their side even. He was the beneficent, compassionate power. Now people could freely love, hate, become jealous of him, show him both pleasure and displeasure. Even man could threaten God, not to believe at him, not to pray to him. People became overwhelmed by the love and compassion of their imagined God. People can now express their most intimate kind of love to a loving God. The emergence of such concepts as brides of God, Christ's bride, Hindu Devadasis stem from this kind of thinking. The human soul could get united to the supreme, eternal soul and become one. This was the concept of eternal liberation or moksha, when people would be freed from the cycle of sorrowful rebirth and get united permanently with God. Many other concepts also took birth, such as God and human soul being separate, Dvaita, dual, or being same, Advaita, singular, or even both dual and singular, Dvaita, Advaita. These kind of philosophical, religious, theological concepts emerged. The new equations between man and God thus laid the basis of emergence of bhakti. Thus, the concept of interrelationship between God and man that emerged during the Third Alliance laid the foundations for emergence of bhakti within Hinduism. And it was these concepts that percolated to Assam. Assam is Vaishnavism too. The direct relationship between Bhagavan and the Bhakta is the essence of bhakti. The bhakti scenario in Assam. There had been a lot of discussions, I have already said, about various religious aspects of bhakti. Let us now move to Doniga to see what bhakti is as a concept. She says, bhakti, which is more a religious lifestyle or a movement than a specific sect, was a major force of inclusiveness with an antinomian attitude towards the pariah and woman. Yet violence of passion that it generated also led to inter-religious hostility. So bhakti is said to have emerged during the Third Alliance. What are the specific characters of bhakti in Assamese Vaishnavism? The Assamese Bhakti Marg. The Assamese Bhakti Marg, God Bhagavan is not something out of reach of the common bhakta or the worshipper. The God is very close to the worshipper, who always stands by the disciples in need. He is the supreme soul for the bhakta, one who saves him, protects him from all dangers and troubles. Let us take the story of Gajendra Upakhan, the king of the elephant Gajendra, a proud and vain, powerful beast, was held by a graha, an immense crocodile, while he was cavorting with his consorts in a lake. Unable to free himself, Gajendra held up a lotus blossom by his trunk and prayed to Vishnu and God Vishnu and submitted himself to his mercy. There should have been no reason for God to save such a vain beast. But as he has taken refuge in God, expressing his devotion or bhakti, God rescued him from the clutches of graha. Hence, those people who submit themselves to God and pray to him with devotion or bhakti for deliverance in this world are taken care by the benevolent God. This is the message of bhakti in the true story and the true story of Gajendra to the people. Message about relationship between man and the bhakta. This new God is open to all sinners and wrongdoers and even unbelievers. In Christianity, if the sinner confesses to and owes up his or her sins, truly become repentant and seeks mercy from the Jesus or God, then God or Jesus forgives them and redeems them of their sins. But in the Indian and also Assamese Bhakti Marg, all these are not necessary. You have only to submit completely to God and take his name in adoration, and you become fit to be recipient of God's compassion, and it opens up the way to moksha or salvation. Such was the significance of taking God's name. There is the story of Ajamil Brahmin. That Ajamil was a Brahmin was no coincidence. He has been chosen deliberately. Ajamil Brahmin was a great sinner. There was not a sin that he has not committed in life. Right from theft, dacoity, drinking, gambling, visiting houses of ill repute, murder even. At his deathbed, Ajamil, afraid of his sins and dreading the demon messengers of Jama will come to him to take him to hell, called out to his youngest son named Narayana, Vishnu. At the mere calling of the name Narayana repeatedly, God was pleased, and he sent 4 angels from heaven that drove away the demons and transported him to heaven. With this tale, the Bhakti Marg has shown how mere chanting of the name of the God was enough for deliverance of the greatest sinner. Such became the relationship between God and Bhaktas now. Sometimes this God tests his disciples or the Bhaktas, and quite severely at times. Those who are unshakable in their faith at the times of severe troubles and tribulations can even ascend to heaven during this very life. The teaching is that a Bhakta should keep unflinching belief and loyalty for God. The story of King Harishchandra taught that. King Harishchandra lost his kingdom and has to lead his life as a Chandala. His only son then died, but because of his unflinching devotion, King Harishchandra not only got back the life of his son, but the whole family was transported to heaven, to the abode of Vishnu in this life. It shows how devotion and loyalty to God earns people salvation through the path of bhakti. Even those who don't worship God, as laid down in the Vedas or scriptures, even atheists who don't even believe in God, for them, through the path of bhakti, the doors of salvation are opened by Hinduism. And for this, one did not need costly jaggas or sacrifices, pujas, visiting temples, shrines, or holy places. Unflinching devotion and loyalty to God and chanting his name in adoration is sufficient. It is now between each individual person and God, and no priests or mediators are required. So many such examples could be cited. Bhakti therefore came to acquire a very prestigious position in Hindu religious thought and practice. The mainstream in Hindu thoughts, the margas or paths, given the position of yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti has also been given a position of a yoga. But these are matters of religious theory and philosophy. In reality, Bhakti movement has saved Hinduism from 2 great challenges it has to face in the ideological sphere and in the domain of practice. First, it was the challenge from Buddhism, which was ultimately met with naked violence at times. And the second challenge was from Islam, the transformations that have occurred in Hindu religious thought and practices as a reaction to these challenges mainly flow through the ideology of Bhakti. And it won't be wrong to say that it was Bhakti which practically met these challenges and saved Hinduism. It must not be forgotten. And where Bhakti has ultimately landed God is something to see. In the Assamese Bhakti movement, the gurus and the Bhakti poets brought Krishna of Mahabharata and presented him as a child or a teenager Krishna. It is not that child Krishna is absent in the main Bhagavata Purana from where Bhakti flowed, but it was given a great importance in Assam. There may be 2 main reasons for it. First, the woman folk will greatly be attracted to a child Krishna with whom they can intimately get associated than an adult Krishna. Secondly, the common man will also be able to relate easily with this form of Krishna worship. Not only that, the child Krishna could be brought to dance together with his bhaktas. He, the teenager Krishna, could be presented as a paramour of the Gopikas, who should mean not only cowherdesses, but all female devotees who dance with him, the Rasha, a celestial love dance which is calculated not to raise jealousy in the female devotees' home and family. The god Bhagavan danced together with the bhaktas, the devotees, in a form of heavenly dance, which also can lead to salvation. So the Bhakta poet sang in Assam, Nase Krishna Bimala Ambuja Badana. So by Bansi Gopal Dev, Krishna dances Krishna, the unblemished, beauteous one. When we look at the background of the Bhakti movement, we see that the notions of polyphony and plurality ingrained in the Hindu religious thought and perception provide ample opportunities and freedoms for development of religious thought within it without any problems or barriers thrown by orthodoxy or any fear of hearsay. Professor Danigar has beautifully brought it out. For Indian history, Indian religious history is more like a banyan tree, which, unlike the mighty oak of Europe or Christianity, grows branches that return down to the earth again and become root and trunks of a new tree with new branches, so that eventually you have a forest of banyan trees and you no longer know which was the original trunk. Even if the original trunk dies, the new branches can be new trees. That is the religious history of Bhakti. As a religious movement, Bhakti originated in the Deccan Peninsula, centering on the Tamil areas. Tamil areas mean the areas and people who spoke and used the Tamil language. It was in the great Kaveri River valley where this type of devotional activity, devotional theology, devotional ideology first emerged. But it was not South alone. There was great interrelationship and trade relation between North and South. From the rich hinterlands of the North, from the great cities of the North, the Srastis or the traders used to go to the South for trade. And on their trade routes, they first developed Buddhist religion. Later on, through these trade routes, the Bhakti traveled in the reverse way from south to the north. Now let us examine the question or the vehicle for this new thought, the language. Sanskrit came along with the Vedas and scriptures and was taken up enthusiastically as a religious language, diligently studied, discussed, and used. Soon religious texts were produced in Sanskrit in the south. Almost all the Puranas originally were composed in Sanskrit, was done so in the south, in the southern kingdom of Chalukyas, Pallavas, and Cholas. But the most important linguistic vehicle of the new religious thought, especially of Bhakti movement, was Tamil. Tamil is a language developed from an entirely different root. But in Bhakti, the Tamil language, it drew its sustenance from its very ancient tradition of Sangham. In Tamil, it is Kankam poetry. These poets, one doesn't know how old are they, but these poets sang in two tunes. One was about love. Love in its various manifestations. It was quite secular. Second was adoration of the king, singing the praises of the king. The Vedas were also similar in singing praises of the Devatas. Later on, from this Sangam poetry tradition, great Bhakti poets emerged. It was first with Shiva Bhakti. It emerged, and the Nayamna Bhakta poets started to sing the praises of Shiva. Later on, the Alvars, who sang the praise of Vishnu, also emerged. But in South, the political background is very important. There were great kingdoms which were very long-lasting. I'm just naming them: the Pallavas, the Chalukyas, the Pandyas, the Cholas, the Cheras, later on Vijayanagaram. All these Hindu kingdoms, the king and the emperor changed. And why did the king and emperor change? Because the people have already changed. They have gone into bhakti, and king no longer can ignore. At this point, the Adi Shankaracharya's reforms came. And the Yagya, the Lakhyabali, Sahasrabali, all these blood sacrifices were given up by Hinduism. In its place, it embraced from Buddhism, from its own traditions, non-violence, peace, and all other things. And what was a yajna, a blood sacrifice, became a puja in the temples. And the southern emperors went on building temples after temples after temples. I am just telling you some of the temples which were built, which we all know. Say, the great Bihadeshwara temple dedicated to Shiva in Tanjavur, the Ramanam Nathaswami Jyotirlinga temple in Rameshwara, Kailasnath Shiva temple in the was also, these were all Shiva temples built for Bhakti. Among the Vaishnava temples, the Parthasarathi temples, the famous Venkateshwara Balaji temple, the Varadaraja temple, even a temple to goddess Parvati, who at one time was also taken up in Bhakti movement, the Meenakshi temple were built. So wherever temples were being built, Bhakti was spreading. Wherever Bhakti was spreading, temples were being built. In Assam, we don't have temples. The Assamese Bhakti movement started building satras in the place of temples. No mats, no temples, no great architectural things, but a serene, sedate house of God, which was started by Shankaradeva, became the main organizational basis of Assamese Vaishnavism. Maybe the Satra had some influences, not from the southern temples, it didn't take up that influence. Not from Jagannath Puri, it did not take up that influence. But maybe somewhere from some Buddhist Vihara, that influence might have been taken up, but we have no proof that Shankaradeva was influenced by Buddhist Viharas. In the Assamese experience, to become a very effective religion, what it should have a liberal and powerful religious philosophy that is able to bring a promise of a new life and equality, and that is accepted by the people, and therefore it spreads. Path to a more elevated life with equitability and dignity, that the new religion should be able to provide. Both Jainism and Buddhism did that. But what Shankaracharya did, everything was all right, but the caste differences were not abolished. But in Bhakti, the religious idea that everyone, irrespective of caste, creed, and gender, are eligible for ultimate salvation or moksha. That is the most potent message of bhakti. And therefore, it spread all over India, and also it spread in Assam. In Assam, it had to undergo through various phases. For a moment to spread, we need a band of dedicated pracharakas. And in Assam, after the gurus, a band of dedicated pracharakas who actively took up evangelization and proselytization emerged, who took bhakti into the various people. In Assam, there was another problem. It was not only caste, it was also race, because 2/3 of the Assamese people at that time were of Mongolian origin. And Brahminical Hinduism, though they have accepted their kings and the royal families and given them the status of the Kshatriyas, the laity Mongolians were not given a caste position. They were not outcasts or despised people, but they did not have a caste. Now you have to break this racial barrier. You have to break this caste barrier. You have to break this gender barrier. You have to break the barrier of illiteracy. And that the Vaishnava Pracharakas of Assam could do within 100 to 200 years after death of the great gurus. And this message went into the Mongolian masses. And once that did, the history of Assam no longer remained the same. And moreover, like in Tamil Nadu, where Tamil became the vehicle of the Bhakti movement, everywhere in India, the vehicle of the Bhakti movement was the vernacular language. In Assam too, the vehicle of the Bhakti movement was Assamese language, which took Bhakti to all people, made it possible for all people to embrace Bhakti. And in Assam, it did receive patronage. At one time, Assamese Vaishnavism was even the religion, royal religion, a religion of kings. But there were great repressions on Vaishnavism as well, because at one time, Vaishnavism became so strong that it effectively provided an alternative platform to that of the king's government. So there was repression, and there are innumerable martyrs. You see, of the Mahamorya Satra, 3 gurus were killed. 12 gurus of the Kalsamati Satra were killed by the royal repression. Innumerable Medis and lower level functionaries were killed during the repression. So martyrs galore in Assamese Vaishnavism also. So I am concluding. We have practically come to the end of the time. New light on an old heritage. The Bhakti movement that washed over the Brahmaputra Valley and transformed an entire people and defined the nation had some unique characters that need mentioning. However, briefly, the uniqueness of Vaishnavism in Assam is that its mainstream did not stay confined to mandirs, mats, or even satras, where the role of the common devotee was usually a passive one of the worshipper of the deity, the worship being meditated by a reformed aristocracy. But it penetrated directly to the grassroots, where around the ubiquitous Namgar, which started appearing from the days of Shankardev and became a phenomenon within 100 years, released the religious initiative of the common people of various clans, khels, castes, and ensured common participatory practice of prayer. And it was done both in Satras and Namgar before a Guru Asana, a seat of Guru, were not an idol. But the book, Bhagavata or the Kirtana, is enshrined. The worship is formless. God Krishna, as the supreme power of the universe, can be Shaguna as well as Nirguna. So these unique characteristics of Assamese Vaishnavism has made it a force which has survived the trials and tribulations of the times, survived severe royal repressions, foreign invasions, even civil wars, and has grown stronger, developed, and ultimately we find it where it is today. With these words, I don't know how I have been able to do justice to my subject, but as a tribute to Professor Maheswar Neog, I have tried to present a different perspective of Assamese Vaishnavism from the aspect of religious history, which I think my listeners may have something to think about. Thank you and namaskar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borah. May I request Professor Shri Pranav Swarup Neog to propose the vote of thanks in his capacity as trustee of the Professor Maheswar Neog Memorial Trust, apart from being his son and member of the family.
Namaskar. It is such an honor for me to get an opportunity to thank you all for your presence in making this webinar a great success. I extend my gratitude to Honorable Speaker, Principal Dr. Dhruba Jyoti Borah, eminent physician, administrator, literature, to take out time from his busy schedule to grace the event and deliver an invigorating lecture. Thank you for sharing us with your words on this special day. A special thanks to Dr. Professor Nageswar sir, Dr. Arshia Sethi, Dr. Pradeep Jyoti Mahanto for their cooperation to organize a webinar amid the pandemic. Our special thanks also goes to Jai Kishan Menon, Mallika Rao, Adil Sethi, and Aman Sethi for their constant support. I also take this opportunity to thank the management of Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, Ministry of Health, Government of India, for organizing a lecture this afternoon in honor of Professor Maheswar Neog, which was delivered by Sri Maheswar Borah on the topic Srimanto Hankardev, the uniqueness of the man and his mission. Thank you, Sri Borah, for your enriching speech. Lastly, I once again thank everyone for joining us and making this webinar a success. Good night.
Good night to you all.